G'day punters, today's jaw. Going to service the bearings. I'm actually going to replace the bearings and service the brakes on my ultimate camper. Nothing too exciting. Might be a trick in here that you could take away as we go through this about repacking bearings if you're on the side of the road and you don't have a bearing packer. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to crack these nuts while it's on the ground, and then I'm going to jack it up, put it up on jack stands and go on from there. Wheels are off. Something I've already noticed when doing that. I'll just get under here and have a look. You can see the shock absorber here. You can see there's an oil stain. That means my shock absorbers have been leaking. This is the right hand side one, so it's going to need replacing. And the left hand side one, you can just see a little stain just down the bottom here. So I'm going to have to replace the shock absorbers. Probably be an ideal opportunity to get the springs reset as well, or replaced. I'm heading off tomorrow for 3 weeks, so springs aren't going to be done. But I'll see if I can get some shock absorbers locally, hopefully. The other thing I've noticed, without really working too hard on this, is maybe not that one. The other thing I've noticed is that the rubbers aren't the best anymore either, so I'll probably need new rubbers, and they should come with the shock absorbers anyhow. So as I say, see if we can get some shock absorbers locally and replace those, and when I come back 3 weeks time, pull the springs out and I'll see if I can get them reset. I just thought I'd show you where I've got the jack stands under my Ultimate. I've got a little bit of angle there, so I've got the jack stand sitting on there nicely. Something you've got to be aware of is that's pretty close to the center of gravity, so before you could probably lift up the tow bar or the drawbar and rock on those jack stands. So I've got the back legs down just so that won't happen. Not sure if I mentioned it, but I mentioned it anyhow. I'm actually replacing the bearings in these. When I serviced them before going up to the Cape, I tapped one of the braces in the bearing, so I knew it was bent. And if you look here closely, you actually see some rust in here, so I know water's got in there. So it's an opportune time now to replace them. A mate this morning said, "Oh, why are you doing that? We're just going locally for the next trip." So they're due anyhow. Okay, for those of you who aren't familiar, these are electric brakes. It's just like an electric magnet. And your brake controller just varies the amount of current coming through here, through to your magnet. More current, the stronger the magnet. And that just pulls up against here. And on this rod here, actuates your brakes. The pads themselves, they don't look too bad. So I don't think I'll replace those. I'll give them a clean up. I'll give it all a hose off, a sand. I'll do the same to the inside of the drum. I'll give that a light sand just to clean it all up and hose it out. I'll get rid of all the grease in there. I'm going to pull out the inner razors. Yep. And you can see a little bit of rust in there. The bearings actually don't look too bad. That's the outer one. You can see a little bit of rust on that. Inner one's not too bad. But what I've noticed is the bearing grease, it's a very phosphorescent blue. It shouldn't be like that. It should be a really dark, clear, opaque blue. So yeah, definitely water ingress in there. I don't know if it's just from condensation or not, but anyhow, time to replace the bearings. And I'm going to pull off the other side now. Do exactly the same sort of thing and pull all the bearings out, clean everything up. I'll come back to you then. Just thought I'd show you the difference in colour of the bearing grease. You can see that's a really bright, clear, effervescent colour. Same as inside the dust cap. Right, quite a bit of difference. Now, if you're on the side of the road and you want to get out these inner bearing cups, they're pressed in. At a pinch you could probably use a screwdriver. You probably destroy a screwdriver. I've just used those to push out the inner bearings. Pin punch is going to be the best thing. to get those out, and because you don't want to messy up the bricks too much with grease and stuff, I'm going to put that down underneath. Flip them over and we'll give it a bash, eh? Just got to make sure you find the bearing and not the drum. That's that one out. Pretty simple. Do the same with the outside one. That's hit the ground. That's not all the way out yet. So it's going to turn it up on its edge. Use as many limbs as you need. That's that one out. Do the same with the other side. As I say, bit of a sand up, bit of a clean out, and come back to you then. Brakes are all washed down, so are all the bearing surfaces. So they're all nice and clean. I've given the pads a nice sand back, and so the inside of the drums. All the bearing surfaces I've dried off with some methylated spirits just to try and reduce the amount of surface rust that will accumulate between now and when I go into town and pick up new bearings and stuff. I've done the same with the drums. There is a little bit of surface rust on those. I'm not too worried about that. That'll come off on the first brake. And I've cleaned up the inside of the bearing surfaces in there as well with some methylated spirits. Again, just to try and reduce the amount of surface rust that's going to build up between now and installing the bearings. Just thought I'd show you before I get back into reassembling it. It's always a good idea to see how you adjust these brakes. There's a little star wheel here, and you access it from the backing plate. And on these Ultimates, there's two little inspection plates, one there and one there. So you need to know which one to pop, because you're not really going to see too much generally. And know which way to turn the star wheel around to adjust the brakes. Now I just do a general rule of thumb sort of adjustment on the brakes, same with the Land Cruiser handbrakes. I obviously have the wheels off ground, and I spin the wheels and I'll lock them up by adjusting the star wheel. And once I'm satisfied that the wheels are locked up, I then back off 10 clicks, and usually can hear the clicks, or 10 little 10 movements of the star wheel in there, and make sure that the wheel can turn around. Sometimes the brake pads are still just touching, and that may be just because they're a little bit off center, but that's how I adjust them anyhow. And as I say, as a general rule of thumb, that seems to be working for me. I've been into town now and I've collected up, or I bought a bearing kit. Most bearing businesses, SKF, Timken and that, or reputable trailer shops will have bearing kits for trailers. These are Timken ones because I wanted good quality. They come with outer bearings, inner bearings, a seal, a dust cap and a split pin. So don't forget to hold on to your locking nut and your washer. Now I'm going to show you what I'd say is how I install these bearing kits. These come off the light layer of lube on it, and I don't want any lube on the outside of that and the inside of the hub. Little hammer, just give it a little tap, just to seat it. That's as far as I can take that without doing damage to the bearing surface. So pin punch. You probably could do this too successfully on the side of the road without a pin punch. Eventually you'll hear it and the tone will change when it's seated. Go, change of the tone. Well, I know that's set all the way. And you do exactly the same with the outside one, and same with the other side. I'll come back to you again. Grease, just choose a grease that you're satisfied that you're is suitable for your purpose. I've bought a marine waterproof grease. It's nice and blue. Just a generous dollop on the inside of the dust cap, inside the hub, in between the two races. That's not really going to lubricate anything inside there, but it's going to protect the surface in there from any water damage. Lubricate the race up, and I come right out to where the seal sits, and do the same on the outside one. That's that done. Now, to lubricate these, we'll grease up the bearings themselves. Now I hold the bearing like that, so the bigger surface is facing down, and there's a slight difference between the surface that sticks out a little bit further towards your right, my left, and that sticks out the other way a little bit. I'm going to try and force grease up between those two surfaces so that it comes out the top of the bearing there. And all I do is bit of grease in the palm, grab the bearing and just push down, and eventually, I haven't turned the bearing yet, you'll see grease come out the top, and you can just see it coming through there now. Rotate the bearing, repeat until the whole bearing's done. You find you probably don't need too much grease to do all that. Well, that's probably that done. Just get rid of the excess grease on the back of that because we won't need it. Into the hub. Next part, going to clean off the hands. So to grab the seal. Just wipe off the excess grease. Hands. Seal. No grease around the outside of there. Again, I just use a ball peen hammer. If you've got a socket that'll fit that seal, and you're happy to sit a socket on top of that, go for it. And it's just do gentle taps. And the ball peen hammer, the face, will come level, or won't go any further than the inside face of the hub. I'll show you shortly. Okay, you can hear that all the way around. So all I've done is I've bashed the seal in, so it's level with the outside of that. Now the seal surface itself, the rubber part, just do a little bit of grease on that. Just give it a bit of lubrication to start off with. That's that hub done. Now what do I do on the stub axle? That's the right hand side, so we'll go outside and have a look. Okay, as you can see, the electric brake module's just dropped off. That's okay. And all I do is I'm going to grease up. That's a bearing surface there, that's a bearing surface there, that's the seal surface there. I'm going to put a light film and seal around the seal, grease around the seal surface. Same on the bearing surface, a little bit on the stub axle just to protect the metal, and same around the seal surface, and maybe just around the thread a little bit. Okay, so that's done. You got to make sure your bearing surfaces and seal surface is nice and clean too, without any burrs or things on it. If there's any burrs or any marks or scores in it, should try and clean it up so that there's no burrs or scores, carborundum stone, fine file. Should be okay for minor sort of imperfections, but if it's a major imperfection and you lose your roundness, I suppose, particularly for the seal surface, you might need what's called a speedy sleeve, which just pushes over and gives you a new seal surface. And now the next part is putting on the hub. So I've got all the bits in position ready to go now. Just give it a little once over to make sure I'm happy that the retaining clips for the brake pads are locked in. That spring behind the electronic brakes is in. There's no grease where it shouldn't be. If I just put on there. It's all good. So I've got the hub that is sawing prepared. I'm just going to slide it on. And that's it. Grab the outside bearing, which I've packed as well. Just shove it in. Grab the original washer that I had, put a little bit of grease on that as well, because it's going to come in direct contact with that outside bearing. Shove it on. Grab the nut. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on it as well, because that's just going to protect the metal surfaces in case there's a bit of water that gets in there. Hopefully not. Adjusting bearings. I think there's well, there used to be two schools of thought: preload or freeload. Preload means you're loading your bearing up a little bit, or freeload means that there's a little bit of play. I don't have a thought about either way, really. I just try and get it so that my split pin will go through the lock nut and the hole. And that means there's a little bit of preload. That's the way it is. If there's a little bit of free play, that's the way it is. Now, how do I adjust them? I'm going to give that a spin. That's the brakes you can hear, and the electric brakes also, the magnet just rubbing on the inside of the drum. So I just generally lock up the bearing and the lock nut pretty tight. Just turn it around, make sure the bearing's seated in nice. Back it off about half a turn. You see it's rolling pretty easy. And I'll just do it up until I feel a little bit of pressure. Easier with the wheel on because you can actually wobble it, feel how it feels. That's lined up at the moment with the hole in the stub axle. I've only got one hole in this stub axle, so I've only got one choice of where the split pin goes. There's no free play on that. I'm pretty happy. Split pin. Straight in. I use I forgot the name of the pliers. These sort of pliers with the cut off for adjusting my or fitting my split pin. The inside one I'm going to have to cut because it'll hit the outside of the hub. So I'm going to cut that in about half. Done. Pin punch. And bend it back in towards the center. Done. Just give it another check. Make sure there's no free play. Good-o. Just wipe off the grease from the outside of the dust cap, because that'll be on the outside. Little tap. Pin punch. Make sure it's properly seated. I'm actually hitting the outside of this dust cap because there's a bit more strength there than the center. That's that side done. Do the same for the other side. I've also taken the dust cap off from the inside where I've got to adjust the brakes. And I'm actually going to adjust the brakes without the wheel on it. Okay, before I go on to adjust the brakes. These this is just a creeper moving around. These Ultimates have a couple of little greasing points in these shackles here, 13mm, and they're a hammer fit. And what I mean by that is, once I get this bolt out, I'm going to knock this plate off so we can get into the grease nipple. One each side. And there's a couple of grease points. I think it's one grease point up on that tree hitch. That was pretty loose this time. Okay, grease point. There it is there. Make sure you give it a wipe first. Otherwise, you're just inviting dust to go into your shackle. I've got a little grease gun. Back in the early 80s, Toyota used to include these as part of toolkits in the BJ, FJ, HJ series, 40 series. This one fell out of one of those Land Cruisers at that stage, so a couple of pumps of grease into there until the grease comes out through the sides of the bushes. Job's done on that. One on this side as well, two on that side as I mentioned, and I'm using a high temperature graphite grease in these shackles. Don't forget to clean your grease nipples after you've greased up as well. Just a spot for dust and crap to accumulate. You can see the grease has just come through on that part of the shackle there. And you'll probably maybe just see a little bit in there as well. So that's the swing arms done on this, the trig hitch next. That's a single grease nipple there on the trig hitch. I've already greased that up. You can see a little bit of grease coming through there. Just give it a rotate. Sounds alright. New shock absorbers in too. Got some petters this time. Just see them in there. So adjusting the brakes next, and I'm going to follow the same process that I mentioned earlier. I'm just going to lock up the brakes using the flat edge screwdriver, which I've got ready around this side. There. They're going to back it off 10 clicks or 10 of those segments and those star wheels that we saw before on the brakes. Do that both sides. Make sure your handbrake's off first. That'll be handy. Once I've done that, then I'll just check the handbrake and make sure it's not too loose. If it's too loose, then I'll just tighten it up a little bit. Okay, just in the process of tightening these brakes up to lock up before I back them off. They're just getting tighter. That star wheel's probably almost as far as I can adjust it. So now I can see the little segments on the star wheel. I'm going to back it off about 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. I might back it off 5 and see how we go. 5. Now you can hear a bit of noise there, but really that's not much in the scheme of things. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to adjust the other side and do exactly the same thing. I'll back it off 5 segments, and then I'll apply the handbrake, try and rotate the drums, let off the handbrake, and just check how slack it is again. I'll finish adjusting the handbrakes. I've done exactly as I've said. I've applied the handbrake a few times and released it just to the centre of the brake pads. I haven't adjusted this side from what you saw me do, and you can just hear that those brake pads just touching. This side's about the same. So say I'm not too worried about that. A lot of people might think that you shouldn't let the brakes run, but that isn't both pads running on that. If both pads are perfectly centre, that's a miracle. It's probably one pad on each side, or even the electric brake magneto inside, touching just a little bit. I'm pretty happy with that. So wheels back on. The dust caps first, then the wheels back on, off the jack stands, and that's the service on the off-road camper. Just check that free play, wheel on. There's none there. Check the rotation, see how we go, eh? Seems to be rolling pretty freely. It's not pulling up fast. There's no noises there that I'm concerned about at all. Looks sweet to me. Right hand side this time. It's rolling pretty freely. Getting a little bit of brake drag, but it's not that much that I'm worried about again, as I say. Free play. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So, jack stand out, wheel down, job done.